Thank you, Mr. Assistant Speaker. 12th of August 2021. Life in Canberra changed, and it changed within hours. When we first went into lockdown, the Canberra Liberals stood side by side with this government. Our first priority was and remains the safety of all Canberrans. We respect and support the health advice that is keeping our community safe. And on behalf of the Canberra Liberals, I again acknowledge and thank everyone on the front line, everyone who has and is working hard to make sure that Canberrans are getting through this pandemic. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are now entering the 9th week of lockdown. This lockdown and the incursion of Delta has exposed once again Labor and the Greens' arrogant and complacent governance of our territory over the last 20 years. Despite the efforts of the community and our hard-working frontline workers, the lockdown and its economic fallout will leave lasting consequences on families, on vulnerable Canberrans and on business. Sadly, many children are falling behind, many families are struggling under the poverty line, and many businesses will never reopen. The Treasurer on Wednesday attempted to sell his 10th budget as a turbocharged economic recovery. Mr. Deputy Speaker, after 20 years of consecutive Labor budgets, Canberrans will not be fooled. This is a Band-Aid budget. The Treasurer is right that this budget is a critical one for the future of our territory. But after 20 years in government, after 20 years of fiscal mismanagement, after 20 years of arrogance and complacency, and after 20 years of skyrocketing taxes and cost of living pressures, this government has run out of ideas, and the pandemic has brought to a head the glaring neglect by this government in health, education, housing and infrastructure. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Canberra deserves a world-class health system befitting of the nation's capital. And as one of the smallest yet highest taxing and highest income earning jurisdictions in the nation, we have the tools to create a world-class health system. There is no doubt that COVID-19 has put a strain on our health system, as it has on every health system around the world. But the most recent cash splash by this government to employ additional nurses is too little, too late. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not a new investment. This is the government failing to deliver over half on their election commitment to hire more than 200 nurses. And in the middle of a global pandemic and a COVID-19 outbreak in the ACT, this government has made almost no additional investments in our frontline health staff and infrastructure in health. Without delivering infrastructure projects on time and on budget, our nurses and doctors cannot do their critically important jobs in keeping Canberrans safe. This government was unable to manage the health system before the pandemic. Canberra has been plagued for years by the worst emergency department wait times in the nation, our junior doctors facing the nation's highest rates of bullying and pay uncertainty, and an overall decline in investment in our health system, all under this government. And after 20 years, and now with a pandemic on our hands, Canberrans have no confidence that this government will be able to deliver on its promises to improve our hospitals. Mr. Deputy Speaker, inadequate investment in our health system costs lives. The Canberra Liberals have raised concerns about crumbling infrastructure and overcrowding in our schools for years. And this budget does nothing to address the serious concern of hazardous materials in our schools. And this budget does nothing to address the serious concern of overcrowding in our schools, especially in the inner north. Instead, the bulk of the school infrastructure budget is to be spent on expanding Margaret Henry School, a school, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was opened just 2 years ago. This is a stunning admission of failure on the part of this government to properly plan for our growing school population. The ACT Council of Social Service has raised their concerns that the pandemic has exacerbated the poverty, the inequality, the disadvantage that already exists under this government. And earlier this week, I called for the full review of the targeted assistance strategy to make sure that the right support is going to those who need it. The Canberra Liberals have fought for years for our public housing stock to be brought up to a livable standard. Unbelievably, this government has dismissed our calls to bring our public housing stock to meet the minimum safety standards. The pandemic and the forced lockdowns of some of our most vulnerable Canberrans in houses that are just not fit for quarantine has forced this government to commit $80 million to maintenance. But we know that this is once again a band-aid fix, a catch-up to try and patch up the shocking neglect of public housing stock under this government's watch. Mr Deputy Speaker, we must provide hope and certainty for our businesses who have faced a challenging 18 months and for many who still face an uncertain future. Businesses that cannot see what the next few weeks will look like for them, let alone next year. The next 12 months will be an extremely crucial and challenging time for our community. And the decisions that this government makes over the next 12 months will determine how we recover from the biggest health and economic challenge we have ever faced. We are a strong, resilient community, and I believe we can get our economy back on track with the right priorities and leadership. First, we must back our local businesses to boost confidence, innovation, skills and jobs through and beyond the pandemic. Unfortunately, there are Canberra businesses that will not survive this lockdown. And Mr Deputy Speaker, when we lose these businesses, we don't just lose a business. We lose the spirit of entrepreneurship, of vision, and of everything that represents the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into establishing every small and local business. We lose the heart and soul that goes into starting and growing every small and local business. And our businesses need support now. And we need a plan to back our businesses to support them through and beyond the pandemic. The Canberra Liberals have been listening to our local business community, and I call on this ACT Labor Greens government to back our businesses through this challenging time. Show trust by giving all businesses the opportunity to create COVID-safe plans which will allow them greater freedoms to recommence their operations safely. The default answer to whether businesses can operate should be yes, unless it is clearly contrary to health advice. It should not be what we see now, which is a default no, unless the Chief Minister feels like saying yes. We need consistency with how our COVID-safe restrictions are applied across different sectors. And we must have transparency as to why and how these restrictions are informed by the health advice. TAPER, ACT Government Business Support, to ensure that we do not leave behind local businesses whilst restrictions are still in place and they are not able to trade in any meaningful way. In the Chief Minister's own words, we are out of lockdown on the 15th of October, and yet we know that many restrictions will remain, which will have a huge impact on many, many businesses. It is the Chief Minister who has mandated continuing restrictions despite saying that the lockdown is lifting. He has a responsibility to ensure that Canberra businesses, our businesses, are not forgotten and left behind. Reduce red tape for business. This should be a constant priority for government, but in the immediate recovery period, reduce red tape and inefficiencies on what businesses need to do to get the support that they are entitled to and to access the rebates and delays to repayment that have already been announced. Laws, regulations, procedures and protocols should exist for safety and probity. If there is a form to fill out just for the sake of filling out a form, or if it's a duplicate, let's get rid of it. Let's give time and freedom back to our businesses so they can get back to doing what they do best. Create a local skills and jobs strategy with industry to outline the key targets for skills and jobs growth across the ACT economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that when state and international borders open in the coming months, there will be a significant skills shortage across our economy, especially in the hospitality and retail sectors. Sectors hit the hardest by lockdowns and restrictions. With a local jobs and skills strategy, we can address skills and workforce demands and shortages in key growth industries, including in tourism, defence, clean energy, cybersecurity, and in the trades as we emerge out of lockdown. Canberra, as the nation's capital, is and should be the home of the Australian Public Service. This does not mean that we cannot also diversify our jobs market to attract innovation, technology, skills and jobs that will make our city where anyone can achieve anything. That future must start with a local skills and jobs strategy, which should set out a clear plan to take us there. Review the tax agenda to remove barriers to innovation, investment and entrepreneurship. The impact of taxes on growth, innovation and creativity in business should be reviewed to give businesses the confidence and support that they need to take risks and strengthen our economic recovery. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Canberra Liberals are ambitious for business. We value business, we trust business and we respect business. To all our local businesses that have felt forgotten, felt abandoned, felt left behind and unvalued, know that we have your back and we always will. Let's get our children safely back to the classroom with world-class facilities to deliver a world-class education. Many parents raised significant concerns about hazardous materials in our schools before this outbreak, and since lockdown, their concerns have intensified. They're concerned that when their children do return to the classroom, they will be in schools that do not have appropriate ventilation, schools that are not fit for purpose in this new COVID world. Fast-track these long-awaited upgrades to our ageing schools to create safer learning environments and stimulate our building and construction industry. Prioritise this critical infrastructure funding to create COVID-safe, world-class learning environments so that that our teachers can deliver a world-class education. Our teachers, our students and our parents who have dealt with the challenges of COVID so well deserve a government that prioritises their safety, learning and well-being to bring out the best in every child. We must equip our tradies with the tools they need to deliver on a strong and ambitious infrastructure plan by boosting skills and training. Our building and construction industry literally build our city. With every dollar spent generating a $3 economic return, a robust and thriving building and construction industry is crucial to our economic recovery. Infrastructure investment not only provides critical jobs and economic stimulus, it also lays the foundation for a more livable, vibrant and productive city. The Treasurer has trumpeted a once-in-a-generation infrastructure spend. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that this government is first class when it comes to spin over substance. When it comes to delivering, its legacy of the underspending, of the broken promises and of the delays speaks for itself. Hyperbole and re-announcements do not turbocharge our economy. Glossy brochures and videos do not create more jobs or deliver support for businesses crying out for support right now. A $5 billion infrastructure spend over 5 years at first blush sounds great on paper. But when you start digging into the numbers, Mr Deputy Speaker, this figure has been misrepresented by adding in a fifth year to make it sound bigger and flashier. Last year's budget promised an infrastructure spend of $4.3 billion over 4 years. This year's budget promises an infrastructure spend of $4.48 billion over 4 years. The reality is that this is a 4.2% increase in real terms on the infrastructure spend that was announced last year. Is a 4.2% increase what the Treasurer calls a full throttle economic recovery through infrastructure boost? Creating the illusion of action is no substitute for real action. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must do more to support this industry. We must appropriately invest in training. The ACT government provides the lowest training subsidies for construction and trades in the nation. And despite the federal government's expanded support for apprentices through its Boosting Apprenticeship Commencements program announced just last month, this government has woefully fallen behind in showing our tradies and apprentices that they are valued and worth backing. This neglect has been intensified by the lockdown restrictions that has seen tradies not able to receive hands-on training, a double blow to an industry that has been let down by this ACT government for too long. We must work strategically with industry and the Commonwealth Government to boost local jobs, ensure that every project, small, medium and large, has real opportunities for Canberrans. The major infrastructure investment in our hospital is critical and it is beyond time for excuses and delays. We must have a plan to end infrastructure underspend and end failures to deliver. Instead of blaming industry for not being able to deliver on projects, we must work with industry to build for the future, not make excuses for why something hasn't or cannot be done. The first step towards future-proofing infrastructure underspend, of course, is to provide a significant boost to skills and training. If we don't invest in skills now, we will not see a sustainable, beautiful city that we want to leave for our children. Let's maximise our potential as the knowledge capital and create a plan to safely bring back our international and interstate students. Canberra is the knowledge capital of Australia, but we can be the knowledge capital of the world. We boast some of the most amazing minds in the country, and our research capacity is second to none. In my previous budget reply, I spoke about our city's potential to be at the forefront of research in climate action and renewables, in cybersecurity and defence, and this still holds. Our universities have suffered significant blows with border closures, and we must have a plan to safely bring back international and interstate students. International education is the ACT's first billion-dollar export industry. International students have been a huge part of Canberra and its heart for a long time. Whilst their citizenship on paper belongs to a different country, for many, their hearts belong to us. Not only do our international students support the tertiary and vocational education sectors, they bring the richness of their culture, their language and their voice, making our city more vibrant, more dynamic, more livable. They also play a huge role in core skills in hospitality, retail, IT and the service industry, which make an enormous contribution to our economy. We know that once domestic borders start to open up, all Australian cities and institutions will be competing to attract bright young minds from around the country. We must be ready and competitive when that time comes. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the next 12 months will be an incredibly challenging and important time for our city as we map our way out of this pandemic. Canberrans have already shown the depth of our courage and community in the way that we have responded to the extraordinary events over the past 2 years, from bushfires to smoke, from hail to a global pandemic. The Canberra we want to see in the next 12 months is one that will be stronger, more resilient, and one that has great hope for a brighter tomorrow. And the Canberra of tomorrow that I want to see for my daughter and her generation is one where we have shown incredible heart to pull through the most tough times, where the decisions made by the leaders of today create opportunities for the Canberrans of tomorrow, where we are the city befitting of the nation's capital and the envy of every other city in the world. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, laying the foundation to create this Canberra of tomorrow must start today. Thank you.